It is with pride that I now open Calder Hall, Britain's first atomic power station.
I was at the opening of Calder Hall when I was 4 years old.
We probably were very close that day in the fact that we attended the Queen coming to Calder Hall. We weren't actually at Calder Hall itself, but I can remember early memory we were taken in our pushchair along the cinder track, which adjoins the railway line, which was first put in many years ago, and we went over there to the Bailey Bridge and over to the Sellafield station to watch the Queen coming to open. And I can remember us standing on the roadside up the road to Calder Hall with our little Union Jacks waving, and so I think we were both at the same event, but a lot of years between there and where we are today.
It is now, isn't it? But absolutely remarkable, because we came up here when I was 3, my brother was 4, and my father had been working at Capenhurst as an electrician, and the attraction of coming up here from Liverpool was actually the promise of a council house. So we actually lived in Myres for a long time, until eventually we moved into Seascale. Probably in about the 1964, I think we moved in here, but of course the whole thing was built around Calder Hall itself.
Some of my early recollections are across here on the housing estate, where we used to go and collect wood with the horse and cart, and pick up the wood that the contractors used to leave behind, and we were allowed to go and tidy up the site, and that would be the end of the housing build in Seascale. But Seascale was a population probably of about 200 people before the start of the nuclear industry, and within an 8-year period it went up to 2,000. It was a terrific change to this community, and especially for those of us that lived here all our lives.
I think at that time you had to be in management, and really probably middle to more senior management, or a very technically important person to qualify for the house in Seascale. So there was a particular sort of section of the population that came here all of a sudden as well, to sort of overwhelm the villagers, I suppose.
The difficulty was locals here are used to sitting down and having a good chat about what's happened in their day, whether that was rounding up sheep or whatever it's been their day's been. They were going out to the local pubs and the Winscale Club at the time, and they were meeting people who could not talk about the job they did. And I think it created almost a divided village for a long period, because obviously everybody that came to Seascale had signed the Official Secrets Act.
And I had a job in the local fruiterers on a Saturday, delivering the grocery orders. And you would see the sorts of different sort of social things going on. But I'd never thought at all, actually, till you mentioned it now, all this time, that the impact of perhaps an unintended impact, something like the Official Secrets Act, but given the origins of what the site was, having such an obstacle in terms of just normal day-to-day social discussion. I think for me as well, Calder was sort of pivotal in another sort of sense, because we sold 2 reactors abroad, one to Japan and a power station to Italy. And a reactor training school in the wooden hut that's still outside the Calder Gate was the world's first international training school. And I would be about 10 years old, and a gentleman from the Japan Atomic Power Company, Machida-san, he was being trained in Calder Hall. My father was then an electrical supervisor, and he invited him to our council house in Myres for something to eat. And so he came round and sat down in the chair, and he was making his notes in Japanese kanji. And I was really, really curious about this, So we had this conversation, and of course, eventually the station started up in 1966 and carried on working safely and successfully. I then, for all sorts of reasons, found myself working and living in Tokyo in the mid-90s. And I had to go up to Tokai, and I saw the Tokai station. It was a sort of Calder Hall sister. But more importantly, the Japan Atomic Power Company arranged for me to meet Machida-san again. And this was many, many decades after we'd first met. We had a wonderful time. I came back with lots and lots of memories and presents for my father. I was then in his late 80s. And for me, there were these little connections with family that have gone into a connection with the industry as well. So that here we are now looking at perhaps a new power station next to Sellafield, and it will have Japanese investment from Toshiba and Westinghouse in there. And in a funny way, it's that sort of catalytic thing Calder's been to set those sorts of relationships off. And you're 4 years old, you're sat there on your dad's shoulders, you know, you're watching the Queen, and none of us have got any idea where this goes to. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. It's almost the father of that nuclear family, isn't it, in a way?
Very much so.
And that work's still continuing, isn't it?